Welcome to the Lifewriting podcast, where married authors and screenwriters Stephen Barnes
and Tananarive do talk about writing during stressful times, breaking into Hollywood, and balancing life.
Every week, we'll share more tips on how to build a better life while you create your dream projects.
Even if it's only at the rate of one sentence a day. Life writing is the application of the tools of writing to life and the tools of life to your writing.
Woo, okay, so this is exciting. I see myself in the videos. I'm always jumping up and down when I'm on this podcast, so I'm going to try to keep it together.
It's just natural. That's just the way you are. You wake up sort of bouncing up and down.
But I'm excited about every podcast, but I'm really, really excited about this one. We have an amazing guest that we'll bring in a little bit later. Rodney Barnes. I cannot wait.
In the house.
Is in the house.
Himself.
So, and we'll tell you all about him.
My baby brother.
Even if you don't know him, you know him. So we'll tell you who
it's
exactly
true. You've seen his work.
You've seen it.
So we like to start this out by talking about what's going on in our lives and the way we're applying some of these principles to the actual process. So in the last week, things have been getting kind of interesting. Since it's to do with one of your projects primarily, why don't you talk about it, T?
Yeah, I have a book that has been a reader favorite, and it has been in and out of film development. This is the first time we're getting queries about TV, and they're very, I don't want to say aggressive queries, but they're very, very interested queries. We have 2 offers on the table to put it into development, maybe a third coming after this week. Yeah, that's just ironic, as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, because we have put a lot of time and energy into pitching other projects with, production companies and decks and, sizzle reels, and it's the one you're not pitching that is eliciting all of the excitement. That's just weird.
One of the things that's interesting is the difference between when you're pitching something and you're trying to talk people into being interested in what you're doing, and when a studio is already interested and they call you saying, let us make your project, it's being the belle of the ball at that point. It's flipping the script. And it can be a little bit disorienting because they can be so nice and so sweet and so persuasive, and they are just absolutely your friends when they're trying to get you to do something.
Especially when they've turned you down for stuff in the past.
It's true. So, trying to look at this situation, asking ourselves, well, we've already got 2 deals on the table, either one of which we would have been delighted with a year ago. We would have jumped for, those deals.
Don't tell our reps we said that.
Huh?
Don't tell our reps we said that.
Oh, all right. I won't. But, I think that to the degree that you don't tell your reps that you said that, I think that's the degree to which you're talking about the kid part of you that is doing the Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland thing. Let's put on a show. And the adult part that has to pay the bills.
Right.
Those are 2 different parts of your personality. And I'm really glad to have, a lawyer and a manager and an agency who will sort through these things, try to figure out what your value is in the market, and then they're playing poker with the other people. They don't know what cards you're holding. They don't know when, what you're really going to walk away from. So that game, I think, is not fun for the artist in general. It's stressful, even if you like the number of zeros on the contract. So it's to watch that and to try to keep your perspective, try to keep your head on straight, is a challenge.
It is, but I have to say this: it's a fun challenge.
It's a very fun challenge. It's a very fun challenge.
It beats the challenge of waiting a year and a half to get a contract signed for something you did set up because the director is busy shooting a movie in West Africa somewhere, or on an Oscar run-up, so never available. I mean, literally, you have the studio saying, okay, we'll do it, and you're like, we need a signature, so I'll take it over that.
Well, shall we, as long as you brought that up, we might as well tell the most humiliating part of that story.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, you might as well. I mean,
Okay.
you opened that door. I'm going to walk through it.
Okay.
So for over a year.
A year and a half.
Yeah, we're trying to get this person.
And we needed the money. Let me add that part.
Yes, absolutely. We needed the money. We tried to get this
needed
person's name on the contract. We would see this person's name floating across Twitter. They would tweet that they were, building children's schools in someplace in Africa. or this or that. And we would get into the Twitter stream, and this person, notice we're being very careful.
No, this is AOL, honey. This was way before Twitter. This is like
Okay,
AOL.
it was AOL?
And it would
this
pop
person
up on
would be saying,
AOL.
"Oh yeah, I remember the contract. Don't worry, I'll sign it as soon as I get back." Or, "Don't worry, you've been on my mind." Nothing. Nothing. And then one day came the most humiliating moment because, like I said, we needed the money.
Right.
We just did. We saw that this person was getting a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And we drove up to Hollywood and were in the crowd, pushed our way to the front of the line so we could catch this person's eye as they walked. Yeah, hello, we're here.
We're still here, yes.
Oh my God.
Sign the contract.
Sign the contract. So it was just the most humiliating thing imaginable. And then I finally decided, if we don't get this signed within the next month, we're just pulling the project because I can't go through this anymore. And I finally had a thought that a couple of years earlier, we'd needed a high-powered lawyer to deal with a situation, and we got an advice from my agent, I believe it was, about a very high-powered lawyer, and we paid this person for 1 hour of their time.
A retainer. They had a little bit of money left.
Yes, it cost us more money than we could afford, but he got that done. But we still had about 15 minutes left on the hour that we bought from this high-powered lawyer. So I called him up, and I explained the situation, and he laughed. Because apparently he knew this artist's agent or lawyer, and so now I also got the feeling that he was enjoying being a little bit of a superhero. Nobody else had been able to solve this. He had it worked out within about 48 hours. He called the lawyer. The lawyer called the client. They messaged over to his house a contract. The messenger waited for the artist to sign it. We got it back, and we got paid. Now, nothing ever came of that project, except we got paid.
It was our first chance to write scripts for a major studio, and we wrote 2 drafts, which is what we had in our contract. It was a great learning experience, which is what the vast majority of my Hollywood experiences have been, great learning experiences.
Well, it was especially a good learning experience in terms of understanding how important having the right people in terms of your business is.
Yes.
And one of the reasons why I love our guest today is that he arranged for us to get one of those top level lawyers. And it's been just wonderful having really competent people in your corner. True. Like I said, the kid part of you just wants to say, let's put on a show. But you need adults in the room to manage the money, to look at the zeros, to make sure you don't get walked over. Now, before we... Is there anything else that's been going on in the last week that you wanted to discuss?
No, I think let's just get to
Okay, before we do that, we'd like to say that this show is brought to you by, a variety, by our company. The name of our company is Mastery Plus. We have a variety of different products. When we talk about Afrofuturism, think about our class. It's our online version of the class that Tananarive teaches at UCLA, AfrofuturismWebinar.com. So we'll talk about the other one at the end of the show. But now let's kind of get into this because I don't want to wait any longer. So Tananarive, why don't you read the bio? You got a bio.
I would love to read the bio. This is a great thing for me. Today's guest is Rodney Barnes, a veteran, award-winning screenwriter and producer. He's established himself as a Hollywood mainstay with his vibrant, emphatic voice and producing expertise, securing him an overall deal with HBO. Yes to that. From Adult Swim's The Boondocks to Hulu's Wu-Tang and American Saga, Barnes has displayed versatility across a variety of genres in the industry's largest and most influential programs. I'm wearing this jersey today because he's currently the executive producer for HBO Max's Winning Time, The Rise of the Lakers Dynasty series. And we are loving that. 3 episodes in. The second arc of this critically acclaimed graphic novel Philadelphia was released in August of 2020. I know, Rodney, you're working on a pilot for that as well. And you've been tapped to pen a creative feature for New Regency with Jordan Boat Roberts attached to direct. I hope I'm pronouncing Jordan's name right. And writing a mini series based on the life of golf great Tiger Woods.
You know, there's so much more.
I was going to say, I could go on, but I am going to skip to the part where we want to talk about the Boondocks, because Barnes was a co-executive producer and writer, also on Chris Rock's TV series, Everybody Hates Chris, from 2005 to 2009, worked on Boondocks. So much has been doctoring scripts. You don't even know he's been doctoring. Very funny, writes horror, writes comedy, writes it all. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome the great Rodney Barnes. Come on in.
I need to bring you guys on the road with me to introduce me.
Yeah, you need a hype man.
I do.
That's right.
You guys did a great job.
Hey, since call me Flavor Flav.
That's what all his friends call.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you is you got a great story about how you met Stephen King.
Yes.
And I'd love to hear that, because that was before you became the Rodney Barnes.
Yes.
But it was one of the transitional moments.
This is true. I was working on a movie, Stigmata, and with Gabriel Byrne and Nia Long. And
what were you doing on it?
I was a production assistant, and I saw that they were doing the movie The Green Mile, and they were looking for large black men. And I really wanted to meet Stephen King. I've loved Stephen King my entire life, loved his books. And I've always had this thing where I would go outside of my comfort zone and what normal people would do to achieve a thing. So yes. I find out that the transportation coordinator on Stigmata is actually going to become the transportation coordinator on The Green Mile. So I begged this guy, you got to introduce me to Frank Darabont and different people. You got to get me on. Somehow I have to work on this show so I can meet Stephen King. So he said, look, I've got a 1939 paddy wagon. And it took like a month or so of begging to get him to a place of where he would help me, because he really didn't know me. And he said, I've got this 1939 paddy wagon. If you want to get in the back of it, I've got to take it to Darabont's place at Warner Brothers. And you can get out and he can see what a large black man in the back of this paddy wagon would look like. Great, good, I'm in.
Good one.
So I get in the back of this paddy wagon, but there's no air conditioning or shock absorbers in a 1939 paddy wagon.
Oh my
God. By the time I get to Warner Brothers, I look like an inmate. Sweating and just bad. And it wasn't like, back then I was living in my car. It was a completely different life than the life of now. So I really did. It wasn't the best presentation I could have imagined in meeting Mr. Darabont. I get there, it's Frank Darabont, David Valdez, and our unit line production manager at the time. And boom, the doors open and I hop out. I scare the hell out of everybody. The transport driver's like, no. It's like, he's okay, he's with me. And he starts explaining really poorly as to why I'm there. And Frank Darabont used to be a production assistant on movies as well. And he appreciated how badly I wanted to be a part of it. So he hired me in that moment to be the stand-in for John Coffey. And I got to, the role hadn't been cast yet. So it was Shy McBride, Bill Duke, and finally Michael Clark Duncan, who were the three finalists to come in and audition for the role. So I would walk them from the parking lot to stage and, talk a little bit, chat a little bit. And actually the other guys were more polished actors, but Michael sort of embodied the character in a raw way. He sort of looked the part, and there was something about his rough around the edges acting, not being as polished as the other guys, that sort of won him the role. And I was there from the beginning to the end. And I met Stephen King. He was fantastic. Big picture over my fireplace of the two of us. Signed all my books, lived up to my fantasy.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Am I misremembering something, Rodney? Because I remember years ago, I was at a book signing.
Essawan.
Essawan Books. Was
Essawan
that
Books.
you who came
Yes.
up to me
Yeah. You
and
signed.
said Stephen King recommended my novel, My Soul to Keep to you?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that is such a
Yes.
weird coincidence because of course I'll never forget that. But here
Yes.
you are, and it's
Yes.
like, oh, that's Rodney Barnes.
And you signed my books as
And
well.
I signed
and
your
so
book.
and so I was in a great period of great authors signing books for
Wow.
me. And so there you go.
Well, before you go any further, I want to make sure that people notice some things.
Mhm.
Rodney, you were willing to do whatever it took to get where you
Oh, yeah.
wanted to go. Sleep
Oh, yeah.
in your car, ask a guy who barely knows you for a month, stay in the back of this. What you did in terms of how did you believe in yourself enough to be willing to go through what a lot of people would consider to be, degrading things, or I'm not going to do it. How could you believe in yourself enough to know that something good was going to come out of all this?
Well, I didn't at first. There's another story if you want to hear that story.
Yes,
of how I
please.
got to this other place. So how I got to LA. So I was going through a divorce. I got married really, really young when I lived in Maryland. And I did not know what I was going to do with my life. I was sort of lost because I had planned on being married for the rest of my life. And I was working at a lumber yard in various jobs. I was a campus cop and just was floating from place to place. And I was talking to a friend after my breakup, and I was expressing how badly my life was going. And he said, if you could do anything with your life, what would it be? And I immediately said, I would write movies and TV shows. And he said, just go do that. And I immediately started to make excuses like, I don't know anybody in Hollywood, it's so far away. Everybody in Hollywood must be a genius. I haven't met a genius yet. And just every excuse in the book. So eventually I was sort of forced out of our marital home. And so I moved to DC, re-enrolled in Howard University and School of Communications. And I started to work as a production assistant on movies and TV shows that came into the Maryland, DC area, because they do a lot of glamour shots in the Capitol building, the White House, different places. So worked on Forrest Gump, Clear and Present Danger, Quiz Show, Pelican Brief, a bunch of movies. And eventually I ended up working on a movie, Major Payne, with Damon Wayans.
Yes.
And about a weekend, he called me into his trailer, and I was sure I'd said something or done something wrong. And he said, no, you didn't do anything wrong. He just said, I hear something in you. And he asked me what I wanted to do with my career. I know you don't just want to be a production assistant. Actually, I hadn't thought past being a production assistant, but I immediately said, I want to be a writer. He was like, really? I said, yeah. So for the next 2.5 years, I followed him around the country working on his movies, Celtic Pride, Bulletproof, a couple of others. And eventually in working on Bulletproof, I was commuting from Maryland to wherever, and I would live in my car through the production and make basically enough money to get back home at the end. We're talking about $120 a day or something like that. And eventually I work on a movie, Bulletproof, with him. I'm actually in that movie for a scene if you ever about to rape Adam Sandler in prison. And Damon has a heart-to-heart talk with me. He's like, if you really want to be a writer, you have to move to LA. And this is before the internet, 97, 98, somewhere around there. And there was an internet, but it wasn't this kind of internet. And I packed up my stuff. I moved to LA. I lived on the corner of Laurel Canyon and Ventura behind Long's Drugs. It's a CVS now. And I began the journey. And then about 8 months in, my ex-wife sent my son to come live with me. And so I had to get out of my car. So I started a garbage business to where at the end of shoots, at the end of the day, the caterers and the craft service people need to get rid of their garbage. So they would pay me $3 a bag to load up my truck at the end of the night, and I would find a dumpster. It's illegal, so I hope no one's going to come after me that I dump my stuff in. And I would make an extra couple $100 a night, and I had enough to get an apartment to move my son in. So when he came in, I had an apartment. And that was sort of the grind for the first 2 years was survival, because I really didn't know a lot of people. I really didn't understand the psychology of Hollywood. I did not see a bridge between survival and becoming a writer. And eventually on the Green Mile, I had an epiphany. There was a moment where I sort of understood that if I was ever going to become a writer, I had to stop focusing primarily on survival, and I had to build a skill set that was strong enough to sort of create an opportunity, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And Damon, eventually we reconnected, and he said, I'll give you a job for one day on a movie, on the TV show, My Wife and Kids. And I just kept coming back, even though, and this was before 9/11, so security wasn't very tight on the ABC lot. And every day I just kept coming back for free. And the showrunner was Don Rio. And I quickly learned that the star is the star, but the showrunner is the guy that gives you a job as a writer. And I would sit behind him on the couch and I would just kind of whisper little pitches. And one day he was like, just come sit at the table. And so I'm sitting at the writer's table with all of these geniuses. And I learned that they were just people who worked really, really hard at what they did, that everybody had the same fears and imposter syndrome and all this other stuff. And that was sort of the start of my career. They hired me as a staff writer next year, and things kind of went in a pretty straight line from there.
Great.
The fact is that most people have no idea the price that people pay to get into the game, as well as the price that it pays to stay in the game, and the price that you pay to raise the level of your game. So I'd like to talk a little bit about your endpoint, the most recent, not endpoint, but one of your recent fantastic successes. And then I'd like to go back and talk about the building process, the sustaining process. So winning time.
It feels like you are doing better than ever right now in terms of your work, your prominence. You're out there. You're actually in the series. You play a role as a security
I do. I'm
guard.
Maurice, the head of Forum Security. Yes.
Yeah, we were watching last night, and even though Steve had told me you were in it, I was just watching. I didn't even notice that it was you because I was so absorbed in the story. But everybody seems to love the show, by the way. Congratulations on it. It must be doing great.
Thank you.
For HBO, for you. I have to admit, one of my college friends who lived in my dorm, Communication Residential College, Northwestern University, Andy Hirsch, is in the series as David Stern. So yes, I know, right? So
I'll tell him you said hello.
Please do. Not only was he your friend, but he was in literally the first video adaptation that one of our classmates made. He was the lead in my first video adaptation in college. But in any case, that's not what makes the show so exciting. I was just wondering, how is it doing for you? How did it come about? It seems like a story that was ripe to be told. I mean, what in the world? It's such a great story.
Well, how I became involved, Max Bornstein, who's our showrunner, he and I have been writing together for about a decade, and he hired me on vinyl. We sort of had a meeting. I call it our meet cute, where I was supposed to have like a 15-minute meeting with him. He and Scott Burns were hiring writers for vinyl on HBO. And this was roughly almost 10 years ago. And the meeting lasted 4.5 hours. And we sort of walked away. I knew I had the job. I knew nobody's going to talk to me that long for nothing. But we sort of knew we had a thing. And we complement each other as writers really, really well. And so we wrote a feature after vinyl was canceled, Arc of Justice, that got on the blacklist, and did a couple of other things. And while I was working on Wu-Tang in Staten Island, he was working on a movie, Worth, in New York. And he called me and he said, you know, I got this offer to do this Lakers thing. And would you like to come on and sort of partner with me and go on this adventure with me? I said, sure. And at the time, it was like 9 below zero in Staten Island. We were in Battery Park. It was like 4 a.m. and I cannot take cold anymore. So the thought of working in LA and not having to be in the cold anymore was like, even it could have been about anything as long as it was in LA and I was working with Max. And so we came on and started to write. He had already done a draft of the pilot, and I sort of did a rewrite on it. We've been back and forth until we got to a place where HBO and Adam McKay and all the other folks involved were happy with it. And then we started to assemble the cast. And Francine Maisler is an incredible casting director who sort of found the unknowns that play the Lakers and the knowns that play the management and the ownership and coaches. And so it was just really a process that came together methodically, and then COVID hit. And so right after we had finished shooting the pilot, we had a year and a half to continue to work on, fortunately, because a lot of people lost their jobs during that period. A lot of shows shut down. But we had an opportunity to really get into the script writing process and write the whole season and really go over it and over it and over it. And I think the strength of the show is the foundation of the writing and our ability to sort of really get the best out of scripts, and then the actors and directors who interpret those words sort of just really been a blessing.
It's amazing, great show.
It really is. And before we talk about the building process, I know that I frankly consider your turnaround here, what's happening in your career, to be a small miracle, because you had some issues that you're not shy about talking about.
No.
And so when I first met you, you were not at your peak.
How long ago?
To say the least.
How long ago did you two meet?
Let me tee up the whole thing so to
Sure.
give context before Steve comes in. So I started working on My Wife and Kids around 2000, 2001. And I had a pretty straight shot of work, like from there to about 2011, things were going pretty consistent. I had My Wife and Kids, and then I did Everybody Hates Chris, and then I was doing the Boondocks on top of that, and then I was rewriting movies for the Weinsteins. And life was pretty good, certainly better than I had ever imagined it would, being a guy who was a security guard and worked at Walmart and all these other things. This is fantastic. But I did not develop a career. I was working. I was a gun for hire. You could hire me and I would sit in a chair. And if you needed a funny guy, I would try to be funny. If you needed a guy to be dramatic or whatever the show required, I would try to be that thing. But I was crippled by insecurity and imposter syndrome and a lot of things that a lot of writers carry. And I always had this fleeting fantasy in the back of my mind that if I could make it to Hollywood and make a lot of money, that somehow I could sort of escape the things about myself that I didn't like. And I made it to Hollywood. I made some money, created this persona that I thought would sort of hide me, a mask of sorts. And I created a life around that and sort of an ecosystem around that, and was as miserable as I had ever been in my entire life. I was happier living in my car trying to figure out what the next day was going to be than I was with a nice house on the hill and a Mercedes Benz.
And can I stop you there for one
Of course.
second? What did misery feel and look like to you? I mean, so you've got what would have been like a dream house, probably a dream bedroom.
It was nice.
You're waking up.
A nice house.
What's the feeling?
I don't know who I am. I don't like this world that's around me. I'm working really hard to maintain this illusion of, I started to buy things in my childhood, comic books, toys, Star Wars collectibles. I've got a garage full of stuff that I probably haven't seen in years. And I just sort of was trying to figure out what pacifier I could find to make peace with myself. And I was doing all kinds of things, but none of those things made me happy. And I was desperately looking for it outside of myself. And was in a relationship that wasn't working. Had a couple beautiful kids that to this day I love and sort of saved my life.
And they adore you.
There they are. But it was really difficult waking up every day, not really wanting to wake up every day.
Yes.
It was an odd place to be in because on one hand, you want to be grateful because you got the thing that you work for. On the other hand, the thing that you prayed for hurts. And I remember—
Because you didn't feel like you deserved it?
No, because it wasn't authentic. It wasn't really, and this next part will speak to it a little bit more. So I ended up going through a divorce in it lasted from late 2010 through 2012. And shortly thereafter, I got sick. And during this period of time, I'm not working like I was working. So everything that I had built was sort of falling away because I'm paying for this divorce and I'm fighting a custody case and I'm going through a bunch of different things. And so I'm watching the illusion kind of fall apart, but I'm desperately trying to hold on to it. So I ended up getting sick. I had liver failure, kidney failure, and a heart attack, like boom, 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 all three, and back to back to back to back.
Wow.
And so I'm in the hospital on and off for 4 to 6 months, pretty consistently. And for one of those stretches, I didn't know whether or not I was going to make it out. And I don't think the doctors knew whether or not I was going to make it out because I had a lot of stuff physically working against me and emotionally and psychologically too. And there's a gentleman by the name of Devon Franklin.
Yes.
He is I think I introduced him to you, Steve, at one time. And he came one morning, I was about to go into surgery and he just appeared. It was almost like Gazoo from the Flintstones. He just looked up and popped. He was right there in this beautiful red warm-up suit, beautiful red Nikes, like everything was together because Devon is always together. And Devon Franklin is a pastor and an executive. I think he's a pastor and a producer now. And he prayed for me. And it was one of those prayers I told him he should have waited for the eulogy. It was one, it's like, man, you could have closed with this one. It was so beautiful. And he said, I asked him, and it was a moment of vulnerability, probably the first time I'd been completely honest in years. And I said, how did everything get so bad in my life? And he said, what makes you want to do this? What makes you want to write? And I said, when I was a kid, I loved horror. I loved the Universal Monsters, the Hammer films, all of these things, comic books. I was that kid. I was sort of a blurred before there was a term for it. It was a nerd or a geek at the time. And he said, so it was a heart thing. And I said, yeah, I loved it. I felt like it spoke to me in a different way than it spoke to my friends. And I wanted to give that to other people if I could find the stuff within me to do that. He said, so it's a heart thing. And I said, yeah. And he said, so what are you doing now? Are you working with your heart? And I said, no. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm making money. He said, I think if you go back to working from your heart, I think you'll find your path. And he left me with that. And it stuck in my head that if I could just get out of here, I'm going to work from my heart, even though I have no idea what that means. And things slowly but surely started to turn when I got out of the hospital. And this is when Steve comes along. So I'm looking for someone to help me find this path. And so it was Steve, and I was in and out of therapy because I couldn't afford therapy. And Steve was instrumental. Steve wasn't just a teacher, he was a friend as well. So there was a duality.
And I loved you immediately, bro. There was something about you. I just said, damn, we should have grown up together. We've been trading comic books.
So there was a thing to where you were helping, but what I was trying to do more than anything else was I was trying to change my crowd. I was trying to change because as well as I built a world around myself, I had people around me who I don't think served me in a way that I need to be served. Nothing disparaging against them at all. They were feeding the doppelganger that was sort of representing who I was. And so again, nothing against them. It was all about me. And I needed people who were going to say to me the things that needed to be said. And in all honesty, I needed to up the game for the path that I needed to be on. And I had an intrinsic idea intuitively of what that path was, but I didn't know what it was practically. So there was a lot of anxiety of, okay, when are things going to get better? When are things going to get better? So during this period from a business place, I hadn't written any specs. Television wasn't doing Black sitcoms in the way that they had been doing them before. I really struggled to find work. And that's when I started working on game shows. I started working on award shows. If you look at my IMDb, you see these sitcoms, then you see all of like the Oscars and this, that, and the different things that I had done. And that was sort of the bridge between getting back into the game. And so getting back into the game really consisted of, I went to a Black film conference, the BFF Summit, that Warrington Hudlin had every year before COVID. And one year it was Allen Hughes of the Hughes brothers, Nelson George, and Chris Rock. And Chris, who I knew from Everybody Hates Chris. So I hung with him the whole time. And we went to lunch. And the whole time I'm talking, Allen Hughes is just kind of sizing me up. And I'm like, almost like he wanted to fight me. I had no idea what he was looking at. And I get back to my hotel room and Nelson George said, Allen Hughes wants your phone number. Can I give it to him? Sure. And Allen had a drama that he wanted me, he was looking for a writer to rewrite. And he felt like it was something in what I was saying that led him to say that maybe I should give you a shot at being this guy. And so I jumped at the opportunity because I've always loved the Hughes brothers. And Allen sort of had a vibe, kind of like you, Steve. He kind of had a thing to where the filter, there wasn't much of a filter. He said to me exactly what I needed to hear and the way I needed to hear. And so I've been working on sitcoms and I had a sitcom mentality. In the sitcom world, whether a script is good, bad, or someplace in between, you're going to make a show every week. So it's kind of like factory work. You're going to grind it out, do it quickly, get it in, you get it out. Some better than others, of course. You've got classic television. But for us, it was like you're cranking this stuff out. And so Allen said, get me an outline. I wrote an outline. And I'm not getting any money for this. So I write an outline. He said, oh my God, this is incredible. Go ahead and write the script. Oh my God, this is the turnaround that I'm looking for. So I took 2.5 weeks and I write the script, put everything I got into it. And I give it to Allen, and Allen says, man, this is incredible. This is a great start. I'm like, start? I'm supposed to get some money. I'm supposed to, I did all of this and what happens? And I'm like mad, I'm frustrated. And he was patient with me enough to understand that I didn't understand the difference between art and, I won't say factory work purely, but there was a different process I needed to go through emotionally, psychologically, as it sort of pertained to that thing of writing from my heart. It takes a different energy in writing from my head, and I hadn't made the connection between those two. So I think it was however many drafts later. At this point, it's over 100 drafts, but at that time, it was in the 30s, I think, to get it to a place where he was willing to show it to HBO. And they didn't pick it up. But when I gave it to my agents, they were like, wow, we didn't know you could do this. And it sort of had a different effect. They saw me in a different light because they were pumping me as well to be the sitcom guy. You're going to be the sitcom guy. And I'm looking for money, back then. And now with Allen, I'm looking at something else. And so I got another opportunity with Allen. I did another script, and that one turned out to be the script that sort of turned my career around. It was about these kids. It was a retelling of Lord of the Flies, but with these 4 Black kids in Long Beach. It was loosely based on Snoop Dogg's life. And again, it got set up twice, never made it, but I made a good amount of money off of it. And it sort of opened the eyes to a lot of folks that I could do something else. And the Scorsese folks and Max got a hold of it for a vinyl. And I'm still eating off that script to this day. But having specs in my library sort of changed everything. It made my agents and managers look at me differently. It made me look at me differently. It just turned everything around. And so I started to get drama work. And that's where Marvel's Runaways and American Gods and all of these other things came about. And so there you go.
It's so interesting that it was the specs and getting in the heart place that was such a turnaround for you, because I think in some ways, Steve and I had a similar experience. Our screenwriting was almost limited to when producers approached us and wanted to adapt something. And we were only sort of writing when we were paid or when we were asked, and we weren't writing enough spec scripts. And it
that's
finally,
the lifeblood.
It took a disappointment for us to realize, why are we waiting for other people? Let's just write what we want to write. And we wrote our strongest scripts out of that. And like you say, those samples, they may not get produced, but those samples keep income coming in, keep meetings coming in, get you hired. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's
I would like
really
Rodney,
important.
speak a little bit. You said that spec scripts are your lifeblood.
Yeah.
The process of getting to
Yeah.
know yourself, the process of improving your craft. Would you please speak a little bit more on that? I think that's
Yeah.
gold.
Well, two things. One, those spec scripts I still write, I still improve because I think I've improved as a writer from when I first wrote them. So I continuously update them again and again and again. So when people, they don't ask as much for spec scripts, but every once in a while they still do. And so I try to make them the best representation of what they can be. There's that, but there's so much BS in Hollywood. Everybody believes they're great at what they can do. And these companies, you know, people's livelihoods are dependent upon picking the right people to do the right job. And they can't go into it because you're a nice person or because you've got a great story or because you went to Yale or Harvard or whatever. You have to be able to show that you got the goods. And even then, it's always a proving thing with Hollywood. So this one gig, not long ago that this company wanted me to do, they wanted 3 or 4 specs. They wanted features. They wanted everything. And fortunately, I had it. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have had it. I would have only had sitcoms that were produced. And when you're in a writer's room, no one knows who wrote what. So it's difficult for them to give you credit for having worked on a show. You really only get credit for specs, even after all these years. I've been writing on TV shows for 20 plus years, and no one cares if I give them a Winning Time script or Everybody Hates Chris or Boondocks. They're looking at your specs to say, okay, we know what that thing is. What's your voice? And I think Hollywood buys voices more than they actually buy writers. And we're in the way Hollywood changes is with tone. It was funny in Winning Time, just last night, Chick Hearn, the Chick Hearn character played by Spencer Garrett, had a couple of comments. He made a comment about Pat Riley when he came in, that his voice was effeminate.
Yes.
He used a different word.
Yes.
And he mentioned a gorilla at the door, which was actually me at the time as well. And so
I noticed that.
Yes. And so a couple of people complained on Twitter, and a couple of people complained past Twitter about that. And, you know, we had to argue that this is what 1979 was. It's like, if you look at what comedians were saying, what was sort of in the zeitgeist of, you know, Western culture at that time, it wasn't what it is today. And to eliminate all of that to sort of appease today's sensibilities sort of does a disservice to the reality of the moment. We could go harder, really, if you want to. I grew up with all of that stuff. I grew up with worse. I grew up saying worse because that's what I heard when I was coming up as a young person. And so, you know, you're sort of in a place to where television and film morph and shift to the times. And you have to prove, especially as an older writer as well, that you can adapt to those times in a way that you can write a project that can make money. And so it's always about evolving. It's always about staying ahead of the game. I think self-awareness is imperative. Your ability to look at yourself and see where you need to improve. Your circle needs to continuously improve. There's always a progressive component to it that I think in a weird kind of way keeps you young, because whether or not people like the idea of it, it's a competition.
Yes.
We're all competing because there are only but so many gigs, and that so many has expanded because the 600, if we're talking about television, it's 500-600 channels right now. So there's more work right now than ever, but you're still fighting for eyes. You know, those networks and those streaming services they want the people who can write the things that can get people to come and tune in. And that's no easy feat. It is style of writing, it's voice, it's a myriad of different things. So it's a great time, but it's a great time only if you're prepared for it to be a great time.
Now, you've mentioned several things that I only want to call attention to rather than having to ask you, thank God. It was just, you know, if I was to look at that, it talked about therapy. You've talked about coaching, which is my relationship to you. You've talked about changing your circle of friends to support the person you need to be in order to have a healthy relationship with your career. And also, I would think, a circle of mentors. You found people who believed in you, who were at the level you wanted to be, and apparently you solicited and listened to their advice. Well,
I think, yes, unfortunately, you're one of them. I think anytime, it's more of finding your tribe, and there are always elders in the tribe and people who have can speak to you in a language that can help you do the thing that you want to do. I think whether it's in a negative realm or positive realm, you can create a world around you to support negative things or positive things. And in this realm, as far as writing is concerned, for me, I remember being in circles to where people would criticize my work or even outright say, you can't write. And because I have this imposter syndrome and I have massive insecurity and anxiety and depression and a bunch of other things, any negative stuff immediately sort of is like a leech, and it attaches itself and you start wondering whether or not it's true. And then I would find other people who would say positive things, and it'd be like, well, who do I listen to? Which one? Yeah, one's got to be right. And they would be far swings of the pendulum. Like some people would say words like brilliant and genius, and some people would say, nothing. And so I had to sort of figure out which side I wanted to be on, because there's a part of insecurity that attaches itself to negativity. And I want to prove myself to these people over here that I'm not what you say I am, because secretly I'm trying to prove to myself that what they're saying isn't true. And I spent a lot of time in that place of trying to prove myself. And then I come over to this side and I'm getting, legendary, world-renowned producers and folk saying these positive things. And I realized that not only were they saying them, but I was actually doing the thing. It was an aspect of it was true. And my therapist would probably say all of it is true, but that just tells you I'm not quite there yet. But, I found people who really who understood my voice, that appreciated my voice, that helped me support my voice and encourage me to continue on. And I found that the closer I was emotionally to the material, the more I could connect in a way that felt authentic and real, the more confident I became.
How do you make that connection with the material? What process do you go through to try to become more authentic?
It's really simple. You become someone who's honest. And the more honest you can be with yourself, the more honest you can be with the material. And in the beginning, I used to try to write things that were like the things that I was working on. So if I had any specs, they were like my wife and kids, or they were like the Boondocks, or they were like Everybody Hates Chris, because I'm thinking that's what people would like, and they will buy those things and continuously give me money. And my heart wasn't there. And, people would ask me all the time, why don't you write more comedy? Why don't you, do more of this stuff? That's what you're making money at. And my agents would push me in that direction. And I'm thinking, I got a family. I like living the way that I'm living. I should just do that. But inside, I'm that kid, that you speak of from time to time. That 9-year-old wants to watch Hammer films and is reading Carrie or Different Seasons or My Soul to Keep or whatever, and wants to be over there. And the only thing that's stopping him from being over there is deep down, he's sort of afraid that he can't do it. And he's not really speaking to any level of authenticity. And when I thought I was going to die, part of that prayer or that hope was that if I ever get out of here, I'm going to do it, because now it's a weird thing, especially when you're a big guy. And at one time in my life, I was an athlete, not a very good one, but I was an athlete nonetheless. And I always felt, I knew I was going to die, but it wasn't coming anytime soon. Like I got this time and I'm going to live at least to the way technology and everything's working. I'm going to be in my 80s or 90s and I'm good. And there was nothing to persuade me otherwise. And then when I was faced with mortality and I realized that, kind of like the Stoics, memento mori, and remember that you have to die, was right in front of my face now. And I know that I don't have as much time as I thought I was going to have. So if I get out of here, I'm going to try to, sort of incorporate that Devon Franklin thing and operate from my heart. And I'm going to write the kind of stuff that I want to write. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If I fail, I fail. I'll never be Stephen King. I'll never be you. I'll never be you guys. I'll be whatever I'm going to be, but I'm going to give it the best shot I possibly could. And so when I started to write, and Max Bornstein, who's our showrunner on a Winning Time, where I was talking about meeting him, he also encouraged and pushed in a different kind of way than Allen did. It was more of a practical push now because Allen's a director, Max is a writer. And so we had a conversation one day when we were writing Arc of Justice. That's the movie, the screenplay that got on the blacklist. And he called me, and I was working on like the hip hop awards. I was taking everything that came my way. And he said, you know, you treat me sometimes like I'm your boss and we're really partners. And he said it in a way that sort of spoke to, I'm not coming in to sit in one of those chairs and just do a job. I want all of you, and all of me is going to meet all of you, and we're going to put all of us together. We're going to make a thing. And the more you find people like that, the more emotionally connected you become, the more passionate you become. That's going to reflect in the work. It's not just about sitting in a chair in a writer's room and hopefully you can get 3-4 good jokes off during the day. You sort of earned your check. Here, it's every moment of every day. You're constantly thinking about ways to make a project better. And that's sort of how Winning Time at its best, season 1, 2 in the morning, I might have an idea and I send him a text. 4 in the morning, he may respond and we get on the phone and we're talking for 4 or 5 hours about race and culture and the game and the business of basketball and, what it felt like when I was alive in 1979. What was the world like? Talking about relationships, I relate to Dr. Buss in a lot of ways as well, and not just the Black characters. I had problematic relationships with my mother and father and, just different aspects of life. But we're talking about, it's a weird walk between life and the work. And the closer you can get those two together, I get this feeling, again, having read so many of Stephen King's books, that he's talking about family, he's talking about alcoholism, he's talking about his fears and death and stuff. And the books, I realize now, even as a child, that those stories resonated with me so deeply because they resonated so deeply within him when he was doing them. That passion was coming out of him and into me via the story. And so the more I can write from that place and do that with comic books and everything, it requires finding something good about myself to hold on to and love. It requires passion, which means in my interpersonal life, the nature of my relationships have to improve and be really, really meaningful. Once you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together, and I wish 20 years ago this had come so I would have more time on the clock, hopefully, it starts to make the work meaningful and cathartic and all of the things that you would hope writing would be. So it's a beautiful thing when it all comes together.
Rodney, I love the way you articulate your experiences. I know there are times in the past we've just called you for quick advice and you took us to church, just in terms of where we were on the path. And it's so funny you talk about that relationship between life and the work, because that's actually what this podcast, Lifewriting, Write for Your Life, literally is all about. So I have just 2 final quick questions that I think are related. Number one, for people who are just starting out, they haven't even sold that first script, they're just aspiring screenwriters. What element, maybe you've talked about it, but what do you think is the most important thing for them to remember as they're embarking?
Maybe they haven't even written that first script, but they're trying to get in. What would you say?
And then secondly, and think about this, maybe while you're answering the first part, is what are your most important steps towards self-care? Is there a daily ritual or a weekly ritual that helps keep you anchored in your most balanced place?
The first one is easier to answer. The first one I always say, again, as Devon Franklin said, write from your heart. And what does that mean? It's like there's something that drives you to writing. Like, what is that thing? Whether it's a genre, but the more you can make it personal. I write a graphic novel called Philadelphia, and the primary storyline, the A story, is between a father and son who are estranged, and the son has to come back and help the father, who is now a vampire. And a lot of that story had to do with the difficult nature of the relationship between my father and I and my son and I. And I always wondered if my father was still alive, whether or not more time would be the thing. Like, could we heal our issues if it was more time? And vampires are immortal. So that's where the vampire part came in. And in every issue of the book, I try to find something honest about myself to sort of put in there, something I haven't either come to terms with, or something that I'm wrestling with, or something that matters to me. And a lot of times people come back to me and those are the things that they connect with. And it has to be honest, it has to be real. So all of that to say, if you can find something in your life that is honest and real, and you can attach it to this idea, you can marry those two things together, it'll make you want to write more. Because narcissistically, I think people want to write about themselves and about the things that, and I mean that in a good way, people are focused mostly on themselves. And I think that if you can do that, hopefully people will feel that connection between you and the material, and it'll drive you to continuously work on the thing and not abandon it. Because if you're just doing it as a device, like, okay, they're doing superhero movies now, I'm gonna write a superhero movie. At a certain point, if there's no passion underneath of it, you're gonna abandon it. You're gonna, or even if you do it, it's gonna reflect that you're doing it for that reason. And I can say that because I've done that thing.
It almost killed you, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. But even in the times when I was doing it out of desperation, because it wasn't like once I got out of the hospital and I got on this path, everything was like great. I was still in a desperate place. And even now, go back and forth. And my agents and managers, they're like, you know, you can't say yes to everything. Being able to say no to certain things is very, very important. And I'm still learning that one, because I'm still in a place of, it's such an honor. And I'm amazed that somebody's willing to give me money to do this. You know, I'm I've always been a physical guy, and being Black and being seen as a large Black man, because I am a large Black man, I've always been sort of stuck with my physicality. And the fact that I live off of my mind was something that I always wanted in the back of my mind. I wanted to use this instrument, not just so much my physicality. To the second part, my routine, I'm still working on that. I have never, ever, 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 ever given myself self-care. And whenever I talk to Steve will always say, are you taking care of yourself? And I'm like, all right, I really respect Steve. And so I want to give him an honest answer, but I know I just finished this McDonald's little, like right before he drove up. So I want to be honest about this thing.
And I noticed some sleep interruption there too, with those 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. phone calls.
Yeah, all of that.
You know, Rodney, you know, I don't expect you to come back with some perfect answer. What I expect is
you represent a thing to me. And because you represent the nature of how we came together and the nature of what you are. And you are a little older than me. And I've always sort of collected father figures anyway.
Yes.
So I never want to disappoint the few parents that I have that have come through osmosis. So when you do ask me that question, I want to give you an answer that I would give a real parent.
And I appreciate that, and I accept that, and I'm honored by that. But what I wanted you to know is I have never been disappointed by your answer. I consider that my position is to be a part of a polarity, to be a position, that I'm the one, I've got this thread called our friendship and our love for each other. And anytime you talk to me, I'm going to pull you, I'm going to tug you a little bit in this direction. And it's okay. It's totally okay. I love it that you're honest with me about it. And I will always be in your ear about that, because I think you're one of the worthwhile people that I know. I think you're somebody who has a lot to say and a lot to contribute. And I find you, frankly, an inspiration. We kind of look up to each other, Rodney.
Yes. Well, and thank you for that. And, you know, I think the thing is, and where I was going with that was, I've never taken care of myself ever over the course of my life. I've never valued, I think I've been in survival mode emotionally for as long as I could remember. And when you're in that mode, you're not necessarily thinking about your physical body. You're not thinking about the vessel that got you here. You're thinking about how you feel, and you're trying to protect yourself emotionally because you don't feel protected intrinsically. It's not a natural part of who you are. And so it's a struggle. There are weeks that are great. I was on keto for like 7 weeks and everything was fantastic. You couldn't have told me I wasn't going to win the LA Marathon next year. And then I had one bad night. And about a week and a half ago, and I fell off the wagon, and now I'm under the wagon, and I can see the wheels, and they taste like carbohydrates, and and it was that quick, and I'm all the way back, and so it's like, you know, this constant thing. But I'm blessed to have people in my life, to have a great therapist, to have people around me who, like you just said, the people who care about you tell you the truth. Now, whether or not you want to hear it is another thing. And, you know, I still wrestle with a myriad of things. My past has a tendency to pop back up from time to time and in very inconvenient ways. But it's necessary. And I think in some ways a reminder that you're never there. You know, the Stephen Pressfield has a great book called The War of Art. And where he talks about resistance, and he talks about staying on the path, and there is no, there's not like this destination fulfillment, like you get to a place and everything's perfect. There's always going to be that stuff along the way that reminds you that life isn't perfect and probably isn't meant to be.
Wow.
You know something? It was actually during this podcast, this is our 12th episode, that I realized that I want to have guests who talk like Rodney, because I can, you know, where I'm listening to them and I'm learning myself. It's
Rodney.
like, yeah, I'm gonna do that. It's just like I realize, oh my God, we can use our podcast to meet people who have advice for us. Yes.
Listen, Rodney is always spitting that fire. Rodney,
yes,
and helping other people, coming up behind him. Just a beautiful spirit.
Yep.
I could not be happier for you and where you are. I don't care about the McDonald's, although we do a cheat day. We do a cheat day, which
I have cheat weeks, and when I cheat big. I cheat big.
I'm not gonna lie.
A gambler.
My last cheat day was like 2.5 days, so I'm not perfectly.
I was an hour and a half ago before I got on here. I had to finish off everything during the week.
But
oh God,
we love you as you are. We are so glad that you are still here with us.
Yeah,
thank God.
Absolutely. And we will talk. I'll send something to your person about getting together for dinner.
Yeah, we got to see each other in person now.
We got to do that.
Please, you got to come to the table. You got to
absolutely got to come to the table.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast, because so much of what you were saying just naturally fits into what we teach in our Lifewriting program, which we've turned into a subscription course, a year long, called Lifewriting Premium, where you can find it at lifewritingpremium.com. It's for all kinds of writers, whether you write
we have a beautiful quote about Tananarive's teaching. From a former student, says, quote, "Of all the creative writing workshops I've attended, Tananarive's screenwriting workshop remains one of my favorites. I will never forget her specific praise and the countless opportunities for growth." And that was from B. Charisse Moore, author of Afrofuturism textbook Conjuring Worlds, who just got a 2-book contract from HarperCollins, and you could be next. So just look over at lifewritingpremium.com. And Rodney, I love you, man. I mean, I do. I am grateful that you're in the world. I'm glad, you're taking better care of yourself. You have some ways to.
You look fantastic.
Thank you very much. I'm working on it. It's a work in progress, and eventually, by the time I leave this earth, it's going to be great. So
there you go.
Well, how about it's great right now?
It's great right now.
Perfection is a verb, not a noun.
Exactly.
You're on the path, buddy. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yay,
thank you.
Thanks so much everyone for the podcast,
for listening. And, closing it up, just, be the hero or heroine in the adventure of your lifetime. Take care, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye, everybody.